Taiwan is on the brink of war, but a new move by the US could change everything. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. There's been a major change for Taiwan, and it could determine whether Taiwan remains a free, thriving democracy or falls to China's communist regime. For the past several years, the Chinese Communist Party has ramped up military maneuvers against the island nation. At the beginning of the month, 43 Chinese warplanes swarmed around Taiwan. Xi Jinping has promised to conquer the island with force, and a top Chinese general recently promised no mercy. And Taiwan is not equipped to deal with the Chinese communist threat. Taiwan's military equipment is old, aging battle tanks, a command structure and military doctrine from the Vietnam era. Frontline units have 60% of the manpower they should have. And up until recently, military service lasted just 4 months. It's jokingly referred to as a summer camp by the young men who go through it. One recent graduate said, "There was no regular training. We would go to a shooting range about once every 2 weeks, and we would use old guns from the 1970s. We did shoot at targets, but there was no proper teaching on how to aim, so everyone kept missing. We did zero exercise. There's a fitness test at the end, but we did no preparation for it." Taiwan doesn't even have counterintelligence operations inside China. But as I said, there's been a major change. The US is secretly arming Taiwan to the teeth. I'll tell you more after this quick commercial break. Welcome back. For years, the US has sold weapons to Taiwan. Not a lot, just enough so that Taiwan could defend itself, but not so much that it would spark a confrontation with China. That strategy is no longer working. So the US has radically changed its relationship with Taiwan. At the end of August, President Biden approved an $80 million weapons sale to Taiwan. Now that might not sound like anything significant to you. That's less than the cost of a single modern warplane, especially when you consider the US has a $14 billion backlog of defense transfers. But China freaked out. In an official statement, they said China deplores and firmly opposes this US move. And that's because this weapons sale is something fundamentally different from anything the US has done before. The $80 million wasn't a loan. This was paid for by the American taxpayer because it's under a program called Foreign Military Finance, or FMF. That's been used to send billions to Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, and more recently, Ukraine. All places the US and the United Nations officially recognize as countries. And as you may know, Taiwan is not recognized as a country, even though it should be. Now, the US says it hasn't changed its Taiwan policy, but that's not really true. This is a major departure. It can take up to 10 years to make good on deals involving military equipment. That's why there's that $14 billion backlog. But with FMF, the US is sending weapons directly from its own stocks and its US money, so Taiwan doesn't need to go through the whole approval process. Which is important because Taiwan doesn't have the luxury of time. Taiwan believes China might try to invade by 2027. That's why this FMF deal is so important. According to Taiwanese legislator Wang Tingyu, the US is emphasizing the desperate need to improve our military capacity. It's sending a clear message of strategic clarity to Beijing that we stand together. He also says the $80 million is just the tip of the iceberg. It could be up to $10 billion over the next 5 years. But how helpful will that be if Taiwan's military is understaffed and poorly trained? That's why the US has begun retraining Taiwan's army. I'll tell you more after this final break. Welcome back. So it won't do Taiwan much good to have the latest military equipment if its soldiers can't fight. The problem is Taiwan hasn't considered soldiers or its army a key part of its defense. The idea was that invading the island would be too difficult and risky for China to even attempt, so Taiwan prioritized its Navy and Air Force. According to Lai Yiqing, president of the Prospect Foundation, a Taipei-based think tank, the idea was to engage them in the Taiwan Strait and annihilate them on the beaches. So we put a lot of resources into air and sea defense. But with China's rapid military advancement, that strategy doesn't seem sound anymore. China has the world's largest navy, and its air force is far larger and superior to Taiwan's. So there's a change in strategy. Here's the Center for Strategic and International Studies for more.
The Taiwanese can adopt the porcupine strategy, deploy more mobile anti-ship missiles, build a fully manned and highly capable army, and spend less on expensive and vulnerable ships and aircraft.
The focus will switch to ground troops, infantry, and artillery, repelling an invasion on the beaches and, if necessary, fighting in the towns and cities. But that means Taiwan's army becomes a priority, which it hasn't been. That's why the U.S. is retraining Taiwan's army. Taiwan is preparing to send 2 battalions of ground troops to the U.S. for training, the first time this has happened since the 1970s, back when the U.S. recognized Taiwan. So you can see the major shift in U.S. policy, even if White House officials won't admit it. The Chinese Communist Party sees it too. And what everyone is looking at is the war in Ukraine. An invasion of Taiwan would have a lot of similarities. That kind of guerrilla urban warfare is very likely what Taiwan will need to learn how to fight. And that's why developing Taiwan's army is so important, and why this new FMF deal is so important. Very likely what Taiwan will be getting is Javelin and Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. According to Dr. Lai, in Ukraine, the Stingers have run out very quickly, and the way Ukraine has been using them suggests we need maybe 10 times the number we currently have. Taiwanese troops in the cities will need to quickly launch a strike and then move before a Chinese missile barrage destroys their location. Of course, the best thing would be to prevent a war in the first place. And one way to do that would be for the U.S. to stop funding the Chinese regime at the same time it tries to send money to Taiwan. And I'm happy to say, it finally seems like people are starting to realize that. Because for the first time in decades, foreign investment in China has gone into the negatives. Now, as I'm sure you know, YouTube censorship is a big problem, but I think I've found a way around that, but I'll need your help. I'll tell you about that in just a second, but first, I gotta show some love to the China Uncensored 50-cent army, the fans who contribute even $1 an episode over on patreon.com/China Uncensored. Without their support, I couldn't afford to make China Uncensored, so I hope you'll consider joining. And as a thank you, I'll answer your questions on the show. Today's question comes from David Michael White. Chris, what are your general thoughts on Jon Stewart and his career in comedy? Okay. David is asking that because we recently covered how Jon Stewart's new show on Apple TV got canceled because they wanted him to censor content about China, and he wasn't willing. So first of all, good on Jon Stewart for that. I mean, obviously, China Uncensored was inspired by what Stewart did on The Daily Show. Specifically, I thought that if I could use humor and sarcasm to talk about China the way he did about U.S. news and politics, maybe I could get people interested in China. In fact, not too long after I created the show, I met Jon Stewart in a movie theater in New York. And I have to say, he was a lovely man. He took the time to engage with me, encourage me about the show. And from what I've seen of how he's covered China over the years, he's a lot better than most mainstream media. So, thumbs up to Jon Stewart. Thanks for your question and your longtime support, David. So, how am I beating YouTube censorship? I created a new segment called Deep Thoughts While Gaming to talk about things YouTube would normally censor and hide them in gaming content. This one is about the war between Israel and Hamas using Elden Ring. Click the video or the link in the pinned comment and let me know what you think. And click the orange button to support China Uncensored on Patreon. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.